We'll go pretty rapid fire through these because I've picked quite a few. But first up, my buddy Dave Brett had a great blog post on making your Citrix policy secure by default. So a heads up, I think I also covered it the year before, but the awesome Patrick Coble had a great session and I believe content out there like a matrix showing various different platforms and their security by default. And surprise, most platforms are not very secure by default. So there's settings that you definitely need to change. And Dave gives a great guide when it comes to Citrix on securing by default. Speaking of Patrick Coble, I didn't want to leave him out. He launched his Enterprise Browser Battle, which is a comparison of the major browsers within the scope of security. I believe he also covers the secure browser options, as well as just browser security features themselves. So definitely worth one checking out. Sticking with some security-related topics now, Luke Bency and Sydney Williams had an article on helping your employees make strong passwords a habit. This is something I actually blogged about on my own site a couple of years ago, where I think if you teach employees how to manage their passwords properly and just authentication properly, not just for their enterprise accounts, but for their personal accounts and their personal lives too, I think that would go a long way to helping enterprise security overall. And this is a pretty good blog post on that. Also security related, but more of a podcast. My buddy Jeremy Moskowitz was featured on Run As Radio covering the local administrator password solution and went into the newer iteration too. And I'm highlighting just that episode, but it's been a bumper year for Run As Radio. If you don't listen to the podcast, it's better than my podcast in my opinion. Now it is an interview format, but it's just full of really great interviews. The production qualities are amazing. Check out that podcast. It's awesome. The great Martin Therkelsen had a blog post series on Azure Bastion, and this is a long, comprehensive series. So if you're into Azure and you're looking at network security within Azure, this is one you'll definitely want to check out. It was a pretty big year for Intune because it's been a big year for the last few years with more organizations moving to managing devices that are remote. But Janik Reinhardt had a great blog post on how to create PowerShell scripts to automate tasks in Intune. And speaking of automation, and also very fitting with such the AI heavy year that was 2023, Doug Finke shared his PowerShell AI. So if you want to use ChatGPT from PowerShell or within your PowerShell scripts, check out this. My buddy Trent Tai had an excellent series of tweets on the impact of enabling offloading features that move server processing to the client. And he goes through pretty detailed on what the impact is, showing some metrics and dashboards to make the point. And it couldn't be a scripts, tricks, and tips roundup without featuring the awesome James Rankin. He had a series of blog posts, not necessarily a series where they're all linking one another and keeping within a trend, but just multiple blog posts on the topic of Citrix UPM containers, and I had the pleasure of seeing him present on the topic of profile management in UPM at the Dublin CUGC during the year. It was actually in Belfast, the Irish CUGC, but it was in Belfast. And one of the blog posts is getting started with Citrix UPM containers, so if you haven't tried them out yet, that's a good place to start. Anton van Pelt shared a tip from Jim Moyle that he gave out at the EUC Masters Retreat, and that is you can use control and space when writing PowerShell, and it will give you all the possible parameters that are available. And just like with James Rankin, I couldn't do a roundup without featuring something from Guy Leach. Guy shared some PowerShell for exporting events from the Windows events for specific event providers from a specific date and time. So this is something that I've used quite a lot in my day-to-day IT career. And it's something that's very, very useful because you don't want to have to trudge through those Windows events if you're looking for something specific. Zupan Safar earlier in the year had a PowerShell tip on how to get folder size using PowerShell, which is also something that I've had to do quite a bit in the last year, and you might find it interesting or useful too. I would say one tip, it wasn't actually featured this year, but kind of to reiterate, it seems like there's a little bit of a downturn in terms of EUC community engagement and content being put out there. So if you listen to this podcast and you work in EUC and you don't have something like a podcast, you don't blog, maybe you're not active in forums or going to user groups, I would strongly encourage you to do so, because it seems like those who were maybe speaking at events and doing the blogging are no longer active either. So there is a void. So it would be great if others could step up, and you will get notoriety that you deserve, and you'll just be helping others out as well.